Okay, I myself haven't seen it before. I must try some live commentary. Mostly experimental is interesting for me because I'm also from the experimental field. And yes, I believe the discussion was sometimes on some what I call IT field, and we had not so much questions from the material science community, but maybe we have some or more people in the audience which really work in the labs and are interesting to use the ELN. Other comments, Stefan, Elisabeth?
No, I just think that maybe it's more common to have something like an ELN or self-developed thing for the people who mainly work with computers, that they are more in that topic, and the experimental part is where there's a bigger gap, let's say, and that is what our audience seems to be.
Yeah.
But we have not answered from everybody, so I mean, this is just for us to get some feelings and feedback, and we'll discuss about this afterwards internally. I would say skip to the next slide.
Yep.
So we can quickly pass on it in order to save time to raise some more questions. That was basically about the experience, or if you're already using one of those ELNs, it's for us randomly distributed. So you can move on, please.
But it's more than I thought before. Then we have 50 people who already use one. Huh?
Yeah,
approximately 50. Okay,
yeah. Right.
Next one.
So the level of introducing it, on which scale, just single one up to institutional wise or institute wise. This gives us also indication, and we'll come to that at the very end of the workshop, how we would like to proceed or continue. And
I think this is a question which is very much in the interest of Martina Zimmermann. In her words is the question if you use such a tool bottom up or top down. And this is really an open question, and we are here in our institute, and I believe only in the Dresden University have no answer. Maybe both is possible.
I think at the end both will happen, definitely.
Both will happen, yeah.
People would like to have it very quickly, yeah, small groups or things like that, and then it might come up that the university or the institution decided to use another one, and that's
from my experience, the really big companies in Germany,
yeah,
they have one top down because they cannot work otherwise.
That's for companies. I fully agree. For institutions like universities, I think it's different at some point, and I think that was becoming important to have the opportunity with this export to use different systems. Yeah, so I think it might be an opportunity. So last slide. Then the last question was about how easy and smooth the introduction of the current ELN system was, from 1 to 5. I would say that it's somewhere in the average overall.
Yeah.
So, yeah. If somebody wants to share an impression, please feel free. But for us, it's first of all important to have this first feedback and use it. And with that, I think we can move on to the general discussion round. I think Jörg will structure it a little bit.
Yes, I think it's necessary, and I would like to cluster it in 3 sections. Maybe the first one is really fast, and then we have more time for others. I think we shall first discuss questions which concern the MatWerk community, which is not IT questions. I already said I had the feeling that we had discussed more IT questions, which comes directly from the MatWerk requirements. I have one if nobody has one. And secondly, are there questions from say other users or or questions which not so much are concerned with the MatWerk or material science requirements, We had some in the chats, I believe, some general where the data hosted and so on and so on. And then third, IT, what I call IT questions. Yes, this unfortunately far from me, but yes, I will cluster it in that way, and I open the discussion. Please, material scientists, asks your concerning your special requirements. And yes, maybe hand raising or something like that. If there is no one or somebody needs a minute to bring it out, I have one. It's a question concerning microscopy. We had these microscopy pictures in the data set, and I started with paper lab books many years ago, and I believe our first speaker also started with a copy from a paper lab book, and we had really strong requirements how a lab book, a paper lab book, must be written, numbered pages, and ink drawings and all that, and I used it less and less. And what I do even today is that when I take my microscopy pictures, I often do, and I believe others do also, zoom series. That means I start with a 100 magnification picture, which is an overview on a range of materials, and then I go into detail. I make a 1000 and I make a 10,000 magnification picture. And what I do even today is to make a sketch and to point where the detail is taken from the overview. And this is what I want to have from an electronic lab book. And I haven't seen that before. You all bring the microscopy pictures one beside another. And normally they are, if we make such a zoom series, that they are inside each other. That would be a nice thing for me. Do you think this is possible, or there?
But I think what you describe is a bit like what Homero is doing, right? You import all your stuff into Homero, and Homero can then show you X, Y, Z, and several dimensions of your data.
Okay, and is
not really like the ELN, but more like the place where you can put all your raw data and tag it in a proper way so that it can be visualized through a web browser.
If I also may add to that, the metadata of the SEMs stores the stage position. The stage position for your zoom series is the same because it's you zoom at the same point.
Yeah.
The only difference is the magnification or scale. So it is definitely possible in ELNs or simple, I wouldn't even call it machine learning, to find out if images have the same stage position and were taken at the same day to link them.
But Stefan, what I want to have is, or what I do, and what is a lot of handworking, if I make a report or whatever, if somebody of the doctorate students makes her PhD thesis, they have to do it by hand, and you know how it has to be. You have the overview picture, and then you have to have a white frame or something like that, yes. And then and something with your command that you have the X and Y data from the stage. It seems easy, but I cannot do it.
I mean, that brings us perhaps to a much more fundamental question. What do you expect from an ELN? Do you expect to be a couch potato and go just buy something and it solves all your problems that you can ever imagine? It cannot, right? So there has to be some work that you put into to get something out, because also your instruments, although you have standard instruments, they might not be the same as some others. So I think if you want to have this couch potato version where you buy a project and everything that you can imagine works, it won't be there. Because
Okay, I agree.
Imagine. So I think at a certain point there has to be some data literacy, where there are like 5 people in each professorship, as they call it in Germany, that know these things and then can adopt to Jörg's ideas, right?
Okay.
Because you have different ideas than I have, and these views are different. So that's my point of view on that.
I would like to add to Stefan's view, but first of all, he's totally right. If you want to do special things, you have to put some effort into it, right? We can't really provide a generic solution that does all the special things. And with metadata, you can do a lot of stuff, right? Once the metadata is in, but you still need to do something, like tell the system what to do with the metadata. For example, if you want to draw like this white rectangle on your picture, right? You have to, some kind of tool, script, whatever, has to interpret the metadata and put the thing there. And you can do this for yourself. And if this is just generic enough, right? If everybody would use the same instrument that produces the same metadata, then that could be made into a feature. But typically that's not the case, right? Each lab works differently, each instrument works differently, the metadata looks a little bit differently. So standardization is another thing that could drive this forward, right? If you don't want to do it yourself, proliferate these standards that are coming out or coming up, like Nexus or whatnot, and then we can have tools that work on top of the standard that might cover more cases than just your lab.
Okay.
I might object a little bit because in the end there are not so many instruments. There are like 4 SEM, 5 SEM producers, tensor machines are also in Germany. I bet I can count all of them, 5, perhaps 10. Indentation, there are perhaps a little bit more, but also the order of 10. So there are not that many instrument producers. AFM perhaps most, but there are enough standards for those already. So I think it's possible, and that's the only way to do it, right? We have to adopt to each instrument because each instrument has a different sensitivity, has a different noise floor, whatever. So you have to adopt it to the instrument, and the instrument in Jülich or Dresden, if it's the same, can use the same script. There's no reason to not share it.
But also, as researchers, we need to fight vendors of hardware that do an export only in a proprietary file format that is undocumented. And sometimes, for instance, for microscopy images, for instance, Zeiss, they will have their own ZVI container. And maybe you can export in TIFF, but they do not produce open formats. And this is an issue because we want to have fair data, but then the first thing is that we produce unfair data because a proprietary file format, which is undocumented, is unfair. So then we have to work back to how to extract the metadata from this file, which is some binary blob, and we don't have any documentation about it. So it's important also that we say to the manufacturers, please don't use a closed source format for the research data. It's important that it can be read and understood easily by many tools.
Stefan and the others, one remark. As you know, at Fraunhofer, we are very close to the industry. We must be very close to the industry. And we have some partners which are, say, material testing labs or companies who earn their money with material testing. And what they do, let's say one half, is a very routine, everyday quality control for other companies, even great companies, car manufacturers, or you all know who works in Saxony, and do the same experiment every day. And as we started to deal with ELNs with them in cooperation, they said they want a tool for structuring data. This was also the very first slide from the first ELN, and put data into the lab book and out in a certain way, automated. And my question was, not with you have to do some effort, I understood you, but it is possible in principle or not? Also to do such things, maybe there are other requirements.
I think
Sorry, Marcus, go ahead.
There's an easy part and there's a hard part to it, right? Just importing and exporting files or producing files from the database, like exporting it as JSON or whatnot, right? That's typically easy to do. And then you have the files and you can dump them into another ELN. But the hard part is making the ELNs come to a similar understanding about how these JSON files actually internally look like so that the semantically the information shows up in the same way, and that's the hard part. And the .eln format that was mentioning before, where there's this consortium of ELNs trying to come up with a standard. It has taken the first steps, right? It defined this format, which allows to export files in a certain way. And now the consortium has to take the next step, right? And coming up with a standard for this, like how is my ELN entry represented in JSON so that, I don't know, ELN FAW calls it experiment, right? Nomad calls it entry, and then all the keys are different, right? And there we have to agree on something.
The keys are not different. They are defined by the schema.org keys. So no, they are not different. So basically, there is a dataset entity, which is a folder, or a file entity, which is a file. Okay, and then you have.
Niklas, do we want to go into the details of the ELN format in this group?
Yeah, okay.
Specification.
I ask other questions from the material science.
I mean, if it's already there, then the better, right? And then we can already start working on it. Yeah.
Yes, other questions from my first group. Yes, Kerstin.
Yeah, I have maybe a bit of a related question, but also an unrelated question. So I think we all work in environments where group members come and go all the time, and sometimes publications are not finished, and people who left still need to have access to something, or somebody else takes over the project and needs to have access to the lab book entries of this previous person. And I have very basic experience with lab folder and always found it honestly a bit difficult to follow the entries of my group members who have left to actually make sense of what they have put there. So what are your suggestions on how to deal with this? Would you recommend to export everything as a PDF or transfer the lab book entries to another person? Or also, how do the different lab book providers actually deal with these kind of things?
Okay, is there anybody?
I mean, you asked directly lab folder, so if lab folder also answer that.
You still here?
It's more general.
I mean, the ELN format, it always comes back to that. If you can export it to ELN, somebody can take it with him or herself to the next position. That's one of the great benefits of having an export function, that you can take it with you. Everybody supports basically the PDF output so that you can also take with you. So the leaving and taking data with you is supported in some form. The understanding of somebody else's work, if you have something like,
Maybe to specify that a little bit. So my problem was not understanding somebody else's work. My problem was to find the related entries. Because maybe sometimes also you would like to see things in a chronological order because there were things somehow optimized in a certain way with some logic behind. But for me, it was always difficult to really show these things represented such that I can actually really follow all the different pieces that are entered in the database.
So a number of ELNs today that you saw and have this graph view where you see one dot connected to the next with an arrow to the next point with an arrow to the next point. I think we saw it, in at least 2 solutions. So these things start developing. And there's also another ELN which very famously has all these connections. So these visual displays of being able to follow data from one step to the optimization step, or I think Nicole said that what happens if you split samples, having a view of that, that is something that I guess will be implemented in more or less all of the solution, because it helps, as you said, in certain cases.
would say Nicole has a hand raised first, and then Sarah is from Lab Folder. Please, both of you give your opinion. Nicole.
I think it's two things. It's first of all the internal policy of the group. So how to share data, how to provide access to data of others that left the group. And so for us, it's organized in a way that we just reset the password, and for urgent cases, it's there, and the access can be granted to different people. But this is organized by a policy internally. And another way will be just to transfer the data to a general access point, more or less to the supervisor, something like that. But yeah, we organize it in the other way so that we keep everything and then allow access to the whole ELN or parts of it. And then according to different right levels, people can use the data or share it with others. And the other part is how useful the ELN is in the end. And that's a basic question, I think very important one, because we are organizing everything in ELNs for this purpose, to reuse the data. And if you say that this was very hard to gain with the selection that you made, then it's probably, I don't know whether it's the right choice then in the end. Yeah, it depends also on the domain for sure. But if you said it's very hard to follow the experiments and to understand what was documented, then it's not the best sign, I would say. Yeah, because that's something that has to be clear. Therefore, we are using ELNs.
Okay, Sarah.
Yes, first of all, I would like to know more the details on what was the difficulty exactly, because in Lab Folder, first of all, if someone leaves, you can simply transfer the ownership of the projects done by this person to someone else. So it's very easy to do that simply by changing the ownership. But also the second thing is, if you mean that you can't find like what exactly, I would like to know what exactly the thing that you can't find easy.
Maybe this is more or less a bilateral communication. That's not, maybe it's interesting for all, but let's go to the, Kerstin, if you have a mail address or whatever, you can.
Clearly, Lab Folder specific things we can clearly sort out among ourselves. I was just also interested in hearing other people's opinions. What are solutions in this direction to make these things more easily connected? Because we work indeed also a lot with the same sample, different people working with the same sample, and we have to get all these things connected. And this is indeed something we have been struggling with for some time.
I'm very much with Nicole's answer that this is a question of policy of the company, who has the right to do something with the data, and what happens if once somebody leaves the institute or the group or whatever. I think this is an important question to discuss, but I believe not here. Maybe it's for Stefan for the NFDI-MatWerk, and I believe it's already the question of rights or how to share data or all that is also a big question in NFDI-MatWerk, and I think it will be discussed in another workshop. Okay, Kilian.
Yeah, I have maybe a little bit different topic, which adds up to the poll somehow. So my questions to the 6 products would be, who of them has really experience in, let's say, some larger scale in a department or even institute or a research center wide usage, say different groups with different user rights, say 50 people and up. And if this really works easy, I mean, we are also developing something here in Dresden for us with this internal in the group. It's always simple because everyone has access and you can do it directly. But if more and more people with different techniques, different demands come into the play, who has really access to this?
Yes, we give this question to the 6 presenters who can answer. Is it scalable? Nicole.
Yes, for us it's the case. We have a lot of users in chemistry, but for the full chemistry department and different groups they're in. One needs a very good policy again, also for the for naming people using the ELN to be able to transfer data in a correct way and to assign them to the right groups and so on. So that's something that is a discussion point, but quite easy to solve. And of course, with respect to the devices, it needs some adaptation. The more devices, the more work for sure. Yeah.
Okay, how about the other speakers?
I would love to hear Marcus, maybe Marcus answer on that.
Yeah,
okay. As well as Katharina.
Okay.
The open BIS I know a bit, but
I can give two answers to this. I mean, first is when you don't look at the ELN stuff that Nomad provides, but the more traditional Nomad, where it's about like files and parsing files and stuff like this, man. There we run the central repositories for a couple of years, and 500 users are dumping the data in there and publishing it and stuff like this, right? And we have these 12 million simulations that you can search through, and in this sense, it's scalable. The challenge when it comes to ELNs and experiments and regions where it's not that standardized, the type of data that you want to put in, is that everybody needs to adopt Nomad a little bit differently. And then the question is like whether an institute-wide installation is really feasible, because then someone has to manage all the extensions, the different parsers and the different schemas that people want to use somehow for them, right? And at HZB, we are running a larger pilot at the moment, and there the data government person basically decide, okay, let's try to run multiple Nomad instances, right? It doesn't have to be a single installation, and then different labs can adapt this to different needs independently of each other. And then there's of course the idea of having this network, right? So that it's then easier to have lots of installations and then centralize it later.
But I think the important point is, of course, you can have separate installations, but I think in the end, you need somehow to talk, or they need to talk to each other. Because if I'm an experimentalist, I get my sample from somewhere, I do measurements with my setup, I maybe go to Bessie and do experiments there. We have our InBeam facility. So the sample goes to several places within institutes, within research centers, between research centers and university and so on. So in the end, I would love to gather all the data of this particular sample or within this particular project in one place and not spread over several places where they don't talk to each other. I mean, it's like in the PhD thesis. In the end, you want to be the head or the boss of your data set, so to say. But I think this is exchange of data is an important point here.
Katharina first, then Nicola.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that for OpenBIS, for example, we have this concept of multi-group instances. So we have a couple of installations like this running at ETH. So you have one instance where several groups can have access, and of course they can only see what belongs to them. Indeed, there is the problem that Marcus said before of who manages this instance, because if you are an admin, you can see everything. And so in this case, for example, at ETH, we do. So it's the Scientific IT Services who is the admin of this instance. So we have to do the configuration for everything, for everyone. So this can be kind of a limiting step. Of course, if people have, for the groups that have their own instance, they can customize it by themselves. So this kind of releases the pressure on us. But this is possible. I have to say we don't have at the moment very high numbers of groups in these instances. But we see these use cases are coming, actually primarily from the German community. I just recently received some requests for consultations from a couple of institutes who plan to set up an instance at the institute level that will have to be used by hundreds of users. So this is, I see that there is the need to have this.
Okay, thank you. I would like, as we are already in my second group, you have mentioned that we had some questions in the chat which we postponed, and I will ask the two of them.
Sorry, Jörg, I just wanted to come back
sorry.
on the idea of a sample.
Sorry.
of a sample that moves from lab to lab. And this is actually one of the things that would be solved hopefully by the ELN file format, where I receive a sample from KIT. They are using KD format or KMotion. They send me the sample by post and also by email the ELN file. I re-import it into eLab, for instance. I continue working on it and I can re-export it, and it can move like from different countries, research institute and ELN software. That's the main point. And also that you don't lose data on the way, and that when you re-import it in a meaningful way and not just a big dump of stuff that you still have to reparse and re-understand. So yeah, that's hopefully what we will solve with the ELN file format.
Thank you, Nicholas. Yes, we had these two questions from the chat. I've noticed is the question: is it possible to import ontology functions to have a semantic annotation? And the second, which is, as I feel, not so far away, are there automated functions to determine the fairness, F-I-R, fairness of the data? Yes, somebody who may answer. Ontologies, fairness. Yes, Katharina?
Yes, for ontologies, I can say in OpenBIS, we are working on this. So in the latest OpenBIS version that was released this week, actually, we have support for, well, we already had it before, but it was only at the level of the API. Now we introduce the possibility to import also from the admin UI. So at the moment you can import, you can annotate types with ontologies. The thing that is missing and will come in the next releases is that you cannot see these annotations from the user interface. So this is missing, but is planned for the next release. And also what we will have to provide is the export. So we plan to export to a format like RDF essentially, so where you can reuse these basically these concepts. So this is coming, it's work in progress. We are working on it, we have some new additions with the latest release, but it's still not finished.
Thank you. Other answers? Fairness? Nicole?
I have another answer to the ontology. So what we're doing is we use the vocabularies from commonly used ontologies, like the CHMO and the reaction ontology, but only the vocabularies. And those we use in particular for assigning metadata to the analysis data. So to determine what kind of set of metadata is relevant, therefore we use, or for this we use the vocabularies that have their origin in ontologies. And for the fairness, I don't know. I think this is very tricky, actually. Depends on the domain, and is something just with checking for the fairness of data is already very, very tricky. We tried that for repository entries and it's hard to gain. I don't know whether this is doable for ELNs actually. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Are there other questions to the general usage of ELNs? Not to go too much into IT details. I have one. It docks a little bit on Stefan's remark, and my question is, what do you think if you use an ELN with some sophisticated tools? You described some of that. I don't understand. Do you think that you always need an IT specialist, or at least somebody who knows about Python and so on? Or do you think that it is possible to make a good ELN for somebody like me, who wrote his last program in BASIC 30 years ago?
I think this really depends on what you want to do with your ELN. I mean, we saw different options today, right? And there are some ELNs that you can use right off the box in a productive way and have some good value out of them. But if you want to do very specific stuff, right, we apply sophisticated tools, as you say, that are somewhat tailored towards your lab and your needs. There typically is to there's some extensions to be done, right? And we try to make it as simple as possible for people and document everything and blah blah blah. But some data literacy certainly comes in handy. Like if you want to build an extractor, parser, whatever, or do some additional normalizing functionality, or put a custom plot into the system and things like this.
But you think that what Stefan explained, that he sorts in, or he reads in the metadata from the microscope. He said, yes, you have to write a little thing. It's always necessary to do that. It's not so easy to take a TXT or a plain text file, put it in and say structuralize. Then there are some markers inside. Or Heiko.
Yeah. Hello, Heiko Hafok. I'm from the IWM, Fraunhofer Institute for Mechanics of Materials. And we are trying our way with the institution-wide installation of OpenBIS. And we had the first pilot studies now done, and we are trying to roll it out group by group as a central installation. And to answer my question, I can only give you a few experiences we made in the last months or so. And I would say the great possibilities of ELNs or LIM systems is that you can upload your data in a rather automatic way, which should be also possible for non-IT specialists. And then you have, for example, Python notebooks, and I think that is a big benefit we see. We can even make Python notebooks which access an HPC, for example, and you connect these Python programs, these notebooks, with the data. So you have a kind of curated piece of software which non-experts can start and then in principle see the results. At the moment, these non-experts, they have the same problem because they need software to analyze their experimental data. And so they run around in the group and ask who has the best version to reduce this type of software. So I think in that sense, you do kind of benefit from this connection.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I would say I promised that we go to the IT questions, but maybe we have to discuss hours and hours. But if there are questions to the IT specialist, or what from my point of view IT is, then please feel free. I think we have 10 minutes, maybe somebody, or maybe the one or the other has 5 minutes more than 5 p.m. Yes, David.
Yeah, so I have a question. These kind of systems, some are written in languages which are not, in programming languages which are not really used in science. Do you think it's important to have a system where a scientist can contribute and would be able to understand, or can it be purely like internet technology in, I don't know, languages not used in science, or Java, it's quite outdated? Is it an important aspect in choosing a system to have it maintainable and understandable by, maybe an IT-affine person?
I think here Python is a clear winner because it's both used in the scientific community, but also you can make web application, and Stefan and the Pasta ELN is in Python. So for sure, it can help to have contributors if you don't have the language barrier. But then my software is made in PHP and TypeScript, which are both very easy to learn language. It's not Rust or C. So I would say it's not too much of a barrier for contribution. And in fact, the more important contribution from the community are really ideas and discussions more than the code. I would say the code is less important. It's more interesting to discuss about ideas and concepts that we can have in the software.
I would think if you have an ELN solution that is very customizable and depends on plugins and people writing parsers, normalizers, extractors, whatever you want to call them, it's certainly helpful that you can write those in languages that the scientists speak, right? So I'm pretty sure Basta uses Python there, and Nomad you would also write your normalizers in Python and stuff like this.
And just to clarify, so in